Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and welcome to a video. We're gonna go over some memory overclocking stuff for the Gigabyte Z390 Aorus Master motherboard. Now, this is gonna be a long one because we are gonna be doing memory overclocking, and that is extremely time intensive at the best of times. And so here I am just trying to, cut it down a bit. So, first of all, just, we are on BIOS version, that's not the version there, we're on BIOS version F8E, so that's the, I'm not sure if it's the latest BIOS, but this is just the one I'm using, and the older ones than this are actually worse at memory overclocking than like the BIOS I'm using here. It may not be the most up-to-date one, I've not bothered to check, that is way too much effort. Anyway, so... yeah, also thanks to Gigabyte for sending me actually two Z390 Aorus Masters. So this isn't the first Z390 Master I have have another one, and this one's significantly better at memory overclocking than the other one, though admittedly I've not yet tested the other one on the latest BIOS, and I've not tried the same tricks that I've tried on this one, but basically, like... even if you follow all of my steps in this guide, there's a chance that, some boards are just not going to do the same speeds other boards do. So, do keep that in mind. Because, yeah, this board's been absolutely great for me. I mean, if you've been following the YouTube community section of my channel, then you would know that I recently posted a screenshot of this motherboard doing like 45, 60 megahertz on the memory. With not completely garbage memory timings. Now, admittedly, that's just for like benchmarking purposes, and so like ultimately the difference between like daily settings and benchmarking settings is just how much stress testing you go through and what kind of voltages are tolerable. But so I don't consider it that different, but admittedly that was not like, stable settings. That was just like, hey, this works. Like, this even this posts. And actually, in terms of just posting, I've had the board all the way up to like 46, 66 megahertz. And I guess before we really get into this, I'll just go over the setup. We have a 360mm Asetek AIO. Here, so that's just a regular AIO, except it has a 360mm rad. We're not really focusing on the CPU today, so that's just kind of a side note. We have 32 gigs of DDR4 here. This is all Team Group T-Force Extreme memory. This is 3733 CL18 by spec. It's B-die. So yeah, and I've had this kit from these two kits from Team Group for literally ages now. This is actually the only, well, no, I recently picked up some more decent B-die, but, this is the only, like, two kits that I have that are the same, and sorry for hitting the camera, it's literally between me and the system. So, yeah, and then we have a GT710, I mean, I don't think I even have GPU drivers installed, so that literally doesn't matter, to this, either. So, yeah, and there's a 9900K that was provided by Gigabyte, and, that has the IHS lapped on it, so... yeah, though ultimately the CPU is really not a focus. So before we get into this, I think this BIOS chip, oh yeah, actually, also if you are using the Z390 Master, I strongly recommend you put the board into single BIOS mode, just because that makes your life so much easier. Okay, like it really does make your life so much easier. Put it in single BIOS mode, and then if the BIOS does still change which BIOS chip you're on, then you do have the BIOS selector switch next to that. Which is that one over there, but I have the board in single BIOS because it basically means if we crash a bunch of times in a row, it's not going to screw us over, like, it's not going to kick us into the other BIOS. And on that note, let's go back to the BIOS here. So, on that note, one thing that I strongly recommend when overclocking with any Gigabyte motherboards is that you save all your profiles to a USB stick. Okay, which is that pink thing over there. So I'm using that USB stick for storing all the profiles because otherwise, well, it's unpleasant to work with Gigabyte boards without saving BIOS profiles. Like, the thing is, if you have a motherboard that doesn't have the BIOS switches, like say a Z390 Ultra or a Z390 Pro, basically every time it switches from one BIOS chip to the other BIOS chip, you lose all of your profiles. As in, they don't get erased, but they're saved onto a specific BIOS chip. So if you go from main BIOS to backup BIOS, you need to make all your profiles again. Okay, so I like to save them all on a USB stick. This way, regardless of which BIOS chip I'm on, I can always use the BIOS profiles I've already made. So, yeah, admittedly with the Master, this is not a huge deal because you do have the switches, but on the other boards, this is something you do want to do, and I do it on all my Gigabyte boards at this point just because it's like a good habit to have when you're working with Gigabyte motherboards as far as I'm concerned. And I have complained to them about this, and I even suggested how they could fix this without, you know, dropping the automated dual BIOS, because apparently that's like a thing that they're never going to get rid of, but apparently we're going to be like, last I was told, they're not going to roll out the fixes for that until like the next generation of motherboards. So yeah, I'm just as disappointed as you probably are. So anyway, let's get into memory. Well, actually, no, let's get into the memory overclocking, and we're going to start by loading optimized defaults. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering, I do have, you know, 4x8 for the memory configuration here. So 4x8 gigabytes of the BDI, because this motherboard uses a T-topology memory layout, and this is something that I actually didn't mention in my memory layouts video, but if you actually have a memory controller that's strong enough, and you combine it with T-topology, you can end up in a situation where you will clock better with all DIMMs populated. And the Coffee Lake memory controller is actually so strong that T-topology actually clocks better on 4 DIMMs than with just one, you know, just 1 DIMM per channel. And the reasoning behind that electrically is basically there's a termination problem with the unpopulated DIMMs in a T-topology setup. So if the DIMMs aren't populated, they add a whole bunch of extra signal, like the signal, they basically ruin your signal integrity. So if you have a Master and you're aiming for really high memory frequencies, you're probably going to want to run a 4x8 or a 4x16 setup. If you had a daisy chain motherboard, then, you know, you'd obviously want to run a 2x8 or a 2x16. So anyway, all the Gigabyte boards are T-topology, so for all of them, you're going to want to run a 4x8 or a 4x16, at least if you're going for memory frequency. So that's why we're on 32 gigs here. If you're on, you know, 2x8, ultimately the main difference on 2x8 is going to be that it's just going to clock lower because of the signal integrity issues. So let's get into it. Load optimized defaults, and so that's done at this point, right? Yeah, okay. So we're gonna save and reset, and I also need to go into Windows and turn off MaxMem, because I have been basically benchmarking with this setup here, and so we're gonna just disable the max memory, because essentially MaxMem is a setting that you use when benchmarking with Samsung BDI, because for some reason allocating, like, just allowing the operating system to access all of the memory ruins your stability at very aggressive memory settings. So when you're pushing settings that, you know, basically require more than, say, 1.6, 1.7 volts memory voltage, at those kinds of settings, you generally have to set MaxMem. And the display setup. Screwed up display settings. I'm just going to set it, I mean, I guess a slightly lower resolution would be more legible, but like I need to like survive here, so gonna go with 1920, and for MaxMem we just go to msconfig, boot, advanced options, and as you can see right now, I have the memory available memory restricted to 1.4 gigs, which is just for benchmarking, because I was benchmarking at like 1.7 volts memory voltage earlier. We're just gonna disable that and restart, and now we're gonna get into the actual memory overclocking. I know, it took 8 minutes. And I forgot to lower the exposure so that you can actually read the postcode. There. So now we're going to go into advanced mode, because easy mode is for, well, noobs. There. And I'm just, I don't want to bother with all of this, so I'm just going to load up a I'm just going to load up a, screw it. No, we're going to go through it. So, first of all, I like to set up my CPU, so we're just going to lock the BCLK at 100, CPU to 5 gigahertz, advanced CPU core settings, AVX offset, like, we're not going to run anything with AVX, so who cares, 110, I would not recommend actually do it. Like, I would not recommend that for daily usage, but, you know, if you're just going short term, raising the TJ max of it doesn't really... I mean, it's not good for the CPU, but it's not like, well, you know, short term exposure is not gonna kill it. So yeah, and let's run with 48. So you may find that running unnecessary, like uncore can actually cost you both core clock and memory clock range. And it doesn't really gain you a whole lot of performance. So, you know, like like 100 megahertz more core clock makes a bigger difference than 100 megahertz worth of uncore. Okay, just always keep that in mind. So if you can trade uncore clock for core clock, do it. Okay, that also doesn't mean you want to set your uncore to like 2 gigahertz, but generally speaking, yeah, anyway, so I'm just running it at 48 here because I feel like running it at 48. Gigabyte motherboards are weird in that you need to disable turbo boost on them. That's just a Gigabyte thing. If you're on, say, Asus motherboards, MSI motherboards, or ASRock motherboards, and you disable turbo boost, your CPU is going to be stuck at base clock. Gigabyte motherboards are just special, okay? So disable your turbo boost. That lifts any power limits, and then just to make sure that, well, I've not actually verified that this makes a difference, but it's just a thing I do. So 999. Ultimately, the actual limit is like 4,000 something, but 999 is high enough. We're not going to hit that anyway. So that's why I go for that. And that's all we really need to do in this part of the BIOS. So there, at this point, oh, well, this can be annoying. Wait, that can be annoying, so we're just going to disable that. And there, that's all we really wanted to do. So that's our CPU settings. Memory multiplier, actually, we're just going to start with XMP. We're not going to touch anything there yet. Advanced voltages, so we're not going to touch that. We're going to set that to turbo. We're going to not do anything with that, because actually, since I'm on a dedicated GPU, if we go to the PC health status, you can actually see that the GPU isn't even running. It is being literally fed 0 volts because the iGPU is currently disabled. So we don't need to worry about the voltage settings for the iGPU at all. Like VRM settings for the iGPU, we don't have to worry about that. Max this out, otherwise you get random shutdowns. CPU extreme. We're just going to max this out as well. This motherboard really doesn't have VRM thermal issues, so why would you worry about that? And then this is not good for your idle power efficiency, but to hell with it. Core voltage, 1.32. The CPU is pretty good. I can get, well, I've not validated that 5.1 gigahertz is completely stable at like higher voltages, but 5 gigahertz at 1.32 should work. We're going to disable BCLK adaptive voltage because that'll basically raise our, well, if we were using offsets, it would raise our voltage, but still, we're just going to disable that anyway. Don't need to worry about that. It's not running. CPU VCCIO, I like to start at 1.2 volts. Why do I like to start at 1.2 volts? Because there's literally no reason to run these any lower. Okay, like, neither of these rails pulls a significant amount of power, so they don't really change your CPU load temperature that much. And it's much more comfortable to overclock with too much voltage rather than too little. And it's not like in some scenarios with some memory controllers out there, you may find that, you know, there's voltage rollover where if you keep raising the voltage, it's actually going to get less stable. VCCIO and VCCSA do not do this. That you can go all the way up to like 1.5 volts and it's just going to keep increasing your overclocking headroom. The issue with both of these is that they will eventually break your memory controller. So for long-term usage, I would not go above 1.35 volts on either of them. For benchmarking, I would stick to below 1.45 volts short-term. And then if you're on like sub-zero cooling, then you can go, you know, you can go past, like, into the sort of 1.5-ish range, but I really wouldn't go that high. I will really strongly recommend that you do not leave these on auto ever on any motherboard, especially if you have a high-frequency memory kit, because one of the things that most motherboards like to do, especially if you load up a high-frequency XMP profile, is default your system agent and your VCCIO to completely stupid settings of normally around 1.45 volts or higher. In fact, I think Asus may, for certain frequencies, default to as high as 1.7 volts for System Agent. Which, let's put it this way. If you have 1.7 volts on your System Agent for, I don't know, a couple hours maybe, you're not going to have much left of your System Agent. There's not going to be much left. So You really don't want to leave these on auto because motherboards do stupid things with them. So we're going to just start with 1.2 volts on both because that's a nice starting voltage. Generally, even if you're pushing like high frequencies, well, the more RAM you have and the higher frequency you're pushing, the higher these will have to be. But generally, you don't need to go past like 1.3 volts. And if you do need to go past 1.3 volts, I'd say just it's not worth it. So anyway, VCC sustained, we don't need to worry about. This is literally just for extreme overclocking. Also just for extreme overclocking. Also just for extreme, like this one, straight up don't touch that one. That one screws up your temperature sensors if you tweak it. Also for extreme overclocking, also for extreme overclocking, so don't worry about those. They're basically like, removes cold bugs, removes cold bugs, removes cold bugs. Like, they don't really do anything that you need to worry about. These various PLLs down here, so I asked Gigabyte about these. In their testing, they do sometimes help on, like, engineering sample CPUs with overclocking. But for, like, retail CPUs, they don't tend to do much of anything. Also, if you do want to tweak these, you shouldn't really raise them by more than plus 100 millivolts in general. So, yeah, and they go in steps of 15 millivolts. So, basically, you'd want to stop like right there at 90 millivolts and not go higher. They probably don't do anything for your CPU because you probably don't have an engineering sample chip. But if you do want to spend time playing with them, they do exist, you know, and they do pretty much what it says on the tin. You know, might help system agent, might help memory overclocking. So, well, basically, might help memory overclocking, might help memory overclocking. That could also help your uncore clock. Ring, you know, will help maybe with some memory overclocking just because the uncore does connect the memory to the core, right? So, if the memory speeds up, the uncore tends to end up with more work as well. And core may help with core overclocking, but generally they probably don't do anything and you can just leave them auto. So, that's kind of that. Chipset voltage, don't need to worry about that. DRAM voltage, so we're going to start at 1.45, well, let's just go, like, the thing is, we're gonna 1.45 volts, so the difference between DRAM voltage and training voltage here is that training voltage is what the motherboard posts at. 1.45 volts is what you actually get after the motherboard completes the memory training procedure as part of the post process. So, the idea being here is that the training voltage will actually well, basically, if you're really pushing high frequency, like really aggressive settings, so say 4000 CL12 or something like that, then what tends to happen, especially in my experience with like this Gigabyte board right here, is if you set your training voltage to 2 volts, because like if you're running like 2 volts dim and also 2 volts training voltage, it won't necessarily train. But if you set like 1.85 volts for training voltage and then set a really high dim, then it'll actually train and it'll run at the higher voltage afterwards and it'll work. Okay, so basically, generally you're going to want a lower train, like if you need to set the training voltage differently, you probably need to set it down. Okay? And it's just a quirk of how the training algorithms most motherboards use work. In fact, Asus motherboards have the same option, a similar, like the Asus motherboards offer the same option for the same reason, where essentially sometimes with certain memory kits, you can run into a situation where you need to train on a lower voltage than you end up running at. Okay, so that's what those are for. If you're not pushing extremely high dim voltages, you probably don't need to do any, like, you can just set it to the same thing as training voltage. And in fact, I mean, as your regular DRAM voltage, so training voltage and regular voltage should just be equal to each other. So, yeah, if you're not doing anything really extreme. So for now, we're just going to leave them at 1.45. DDR VPP. This rail does nothing, literally nothing. You don't need to mess with it. Don't worry about it. It doesn't do anything. DRAM termination, this can sometimes help to tweak it downwards. Most of the time, as a rule of thumb, it should be half of your dim voltage, and you do not want to set it above 60% of your dim voltage, if I remember correctly. So, basically, if you were at like 1.5 volts, you know, running voltage, which is definitely, like, that's the upper limit of what I would run daily, just because there's no real long-term data for what happens with memory controllers and memory sticks above 1.5 volts. So I wouldn't go above 1.5 volts for long-term use. But for 1.5 volts, your DRAM termination should be, well, auto will set it to 0.75. You may find that tweaking it down can help on some kits. Tweaking it up can help, can also help. I generally wouldn't set it above 0.8 for long-term use. Okay, so that's that. Also, you really don't want to just raise rate, like, you don't want to run, like, 1 volt termination at 1.5 dim. Okay, that's actually going to be really, really bad for your memory. So, definitely, like, it's supposed to be pretty close to half, and you're probably not going to have to tweak it that much. And generally, you want to tweak it downwards. It's kind of weird like that. Anyway, so let's go back to 1.45. So that's our voltages there. One thing to worth noting with Samsung BDI, which is why you wouldn't necessarily always want to just mash 1.5 volts into it, is Samsung BDI is temperature sensitive. Most memory is somewhat temperature sensitive. So essentially, and what I mean by that is not necessarily that, like, it scales a whole lot, but basically you may find that if you have Samsung BDI at like 1.5 volts and you're running a certain set of settings, those settings may be completely stable as long as the memory sticks stay below, say, 35 degrees Celsius. Really, most BDI kits favor running at about 20 degrees Celsius, right? So slightly below what most people would consider what I would consider room temperature. So that's something worth noting. And essentially, if you raise your memory voltage and then you start failing long stress tests, that basically means your memory sticks are getting a bit warm. It doesn't mean they're literally on fire, okay? Like it's just a stability loss due to a slight temperature increase. And it's completely normal for memory to do this. Okay, so you may find that, you know, if you are in a relatively warm environment or just don't have the best case airflow or whatever, right? Like your systems vary. You may find that it's not optimal to just mash 1.5 volts into your memory kit, even though that is generally safe for long-term use, just because at high load for long periods of time, it'll get the memory so warm that it'll lose stability. So, yeah. Though obviously you can also just loosen out the settings at that point and still run 1.5 volts anyway. It's just that at that point you can probably lower the memory voltage too. So, yeah, that's worth noting. And internal VR control, this is basically a bunch of settings for the voltage regulator when you're not like overriding the core voltage manually. So we're just going to disable all of this, which you don't actually need to do, but I like to disable it for the hell of it. So, that kind of covers all of the voltages at this point. And we have XMP enabled, right? Yeah, we do. Why is this not on auto? There. So now we're gonna F10 and reset. And this should have no problem training. So this is worth noting that like the first time you apply any kind of major significantly different enough memory settings, the board will take a little bit longer to post, or it'll even boot loop several times once you start pushing the really, really high frequencies, because it's essentially trying to figure out how to configure the memory controller to actually function. Okay, that's part of the memory training process. So now that we're in the operating system again, you're going to want to get this. It's called ASRock Timing Utility. It looks like you could maybe adjust timings in the OS. It doesn't actually work. But the main use of this is that you can check all of your memory timings, right? So everything, so that you have a good idea of what the motherboard likes to configure on its own. And this is useful because if the board can post something on auto, that's a pretty good indicator that that's a good starting point from where to like further tune your memory settings. Though I have run into situations where boards would set the TCWL setting too low. I think with the Z390 ITX board from Gigabyte, there I had to manually set the TCWL looser because otherwise it just wouldn't post at high frequencies like 4400 megahertz would need like I think a TCWL of like 18 or something to function. Now, luckily, this board doesn't need that in the 32 gigs configuration. I'm not sure what it would do if we were on 16 gigs, but anyway, so this is good for checking your memory timings because the BIOS doesn't actually tell you what the timings are when you're on auto settings, or at least it doesn't tell you properly what the settings are. You can sometimes find that you get into the operating system and open up the timing utility here, and you'll find that basically the timings that you end up with in the configurator here are actually completely different to what the BIOS says it's setting. So I don't know how that works, but it is something that I did run into. So use this to get your baseline essentially. So then let's quickly run a bit of Geekbench. This is my preferred memory testing, performance test, just because it's pretty quick. It's relatively heavy. And it scales pretty well with memory bandwidth. It's kind of interesting in that it's really biased towards high frequency compared to some other benchmarks like say SuperPi and Cinebench, and actually most benchmarks as far as I'm aware. So yeah, Geekbench 3 is a bit weird. Like the memory performance indicator in it is a bit biased towards higher frequencies settings, but it's good enough. Okay, like it's good enough for just some baseline indications. So it's gonna get a baseline score here. There we go. So we're just focusing on this number right here. So we're getting what, 7,481. Okay. So yeah, margin of error though. So we'll just call it 7,500-ish. But that's our baseline score, and that's at 3733. So now we're gonna see if we can go faster. Like a hell of a lot faster. So yeah, and now it posts really quickly, as you can clearly see. So now we're just going to raise the memory frequency to 4133. Oh, and one thing that I have noticed is that this, the 133 reference clock is generally more stable than the 100. So the interesting thing is like 100 gives you the multipliers like, well, actually, there. So 133 actually gives you, like, you have a 4,000 on 133. At 4133, 4266, 4400, 4533. These, in my experience, are, like, the most stable memory ratios. Like, 4500 in some earlier testing I did with, admittedly, a different motherboard, but 4500 was, like, sketchy as hell, and 4533, where it was perfect, 4500 didn't work very well at all. So anyway, we're going to start off with 4000 here, and we're not going to do anything to the timings yet. I'm just going to leave everything nice and auto for now. We have all our voltages raised already, so we should be good. Save configuration. We should save a profile soon. Yeah, so you can see how the board is, again, taking its time to post, and it's basically because it's figuring out how to configure the sub-timings on its own. At this point, we're going to go back into the BIOS because I want to check if it did something the way I hope it did it. And then we're going to see if... Okay, yeah, so it configured that correctly. We're going to get to what I was just checking. It's a bit of a As far as I'm concerned, it's a bit of a trick for making this board work at high frequencies, so I'm just gonna save a file. Nope. What? No. Nope. Wait, did I just wipe my profiles? No, I didn't. Good. New file. Guide 1. Okay, so we have our profile saved. And now we're gonna do something pretty silly. So we're gonna go manual 19, 19, 19, 38. That's all we're gonna do. And we're just gonna go to 4133. There we go, so that train's no problem. Alright, so that works nice and easy. Now we're gonna go to 4266, and this should still probably work, and I think for 44, like if things go according to plan, 4400 won't post. Okay, so that still trains. And at this point, it should break. Please break. Please break, or I'm going to have a really hard time justifying why this video exists. Oh, come on. Break, 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 break. Okay, it did. I was worried. I was really worried that it was going to work. Okay, so that's a 0-4. And quite frankly, 0-4 you may as well give up early, but I'm just going to show you that this, like, okay, so we're just going to cut the power at the power supply because actually I can't reach back there. So I'm just going to smother the motherboard by holding the power button. And it should not worky. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. That's not fair. Wasn't supposed to work. Okay, well, let's break it. Let's, like, intentionally break it at this point. So, I'm gonna tweak a few settings. It doesn't really like when you do this. Which, like, this is great for your performance, but, it really does upset the training procedure. So we're gonna do that. At this point, it should stop training properly. Yeah, okay, I think I got it looping this time. That's not fair. I hate this. Okay, well, we'll do 4533 then? Like, seriously, I spent several hours with this board, and if I did what I just did, it wouldn't post. Now that I'm recording it, it's just like, yeah, now I'm gonna work. Screw you, Buildzoid. This is why I don't do memory overclocking guides. Though I think it isn't stable. Which is honestly no surprise. Well, this is why I hate memory overclocking guides, because everything freaking work, like, for some reason, behavior is not very consistent. So it's just like, oh yeah, there's this thing you might need to do, except you won't have to do it, because it doesn't happen when I try to record it. Except I think it happened just now. So it looks like fortune has smiled upon me. It might also be too low voltage, because admittedly last time I was doing everything, I was doing it at 1.5 volts. At least the profile is going to come in handy and soon, I think. Unless it now randomly decides that it's going to work again. Please don't. I think... Okay, it's not working. Oh. Cheating! Oh no, okay, it wiped itself. Cool. So, yeah, so it basically reverted to like safe settings. So we're gonna do something that should fix that. So at this point, what you want to set these to is 60, 120, 120, 40. There may be other values that work better for certain like memory kits, because essentially what these are configuring is the termination resistances on the memory sticks. And so the thing is, let's put this in advanced manual, because we might have to set these as well. 60, 120, 120, 20, 40, 40. So essentially those are the, like those settings don't affect performance, but they affect your signal integrity. And if the motherboard will normally, like, if you leave them on auto, the motherboard tries to figure them out on its own when you're posting. Basically sometimes for some reason it just decides to configure them completely freaking wrong. So at this point, we should be able to run 4533. He says, as it evidently doesn't work. Oh, now it does. Yeah, no, it reverted back to safe settings. Oh, wait. Oops. Yeah, that explains a lot, doesn't it? Okay, there we go. 4533. Tried to boot 7.1 gigahertz memory. If that posted, I would have just set a world record. Actually, I would have blown right past the world record. I would have made the world record look like a joke. There, see, now it's mostly working. So the thing, except for the part where Windows is unhappy, which I honestly think is a case of just we have way too much, like, we probably need max mem at this point, but, or it might just, like, there's also a good chance that my DIMMs are just not strong enough, or it's the CPU's memory controller complaining, so at this point it's a good idea to bump these up, because we are pushing quite a ridiculous frequency. We're gonna bump up our, DRAM voltage, because we're still training, right? Like, the system still posts, so there's no reason to raise the training voltage, but we can bump up the DRAM, so, there. We're gonna see if we can make it into Windows now. And finish a Geekbench. I don't think we should need max mem yet. Restart. So the thing about the termination resistances is because I'm not sure that they're necessarily, like what I've configured here, I'm not sure that it's necessarily the best for everything everywhere, because the termination resistances basically, in theory, they'll depend on your motherboard, they'll somewhat depend on your CPU, they'll somewhat depend on your memory sticks. Like what is optimal. So basically, if you're you know, messing with your own system, you can just try the numbers I tried of 60, 60, 120, 120, 40, 40. But if those don't work, I would recommend that you just see what the motherboard sets at frequencies where it trains normally. So at like 4,000 megahertz, just see what it defaults to on its own and just copy that. Because that's where I got my 60, 60, 120, 40, 40. That's where I got my settings from. Is just seeing what the motherboard used up until it stopped working, and just went with that. So, at this point, we're in Windows. As we can clearly see, we are at 4533. 1919, 1938, 2T. So, I mean, the timings aren't exactly spectacular, but what you gotta understand that, like, let me pull up a calculator. No. Okay. So, what you got to understand is that 4533, right, is about, like, that's straight up better than 3200 CL14. Right, if we just do that. Like, it's better. Okay, and somebody's going to be like, wait, Buildzoid, that's not a real number. I know it's not a real number. Like, if you wanted to actually, like, measure the real latency, there's a completely different formula you use. But the thing is, it ultimately doesn't matter if you have a real nanoseconds figure or if you have some arbitrary performance indicator like this, right? And basically, this is higher. So 4533 divided by 19 is a higher value. Therefore, we have better latency than 3200 CL14, right? So if you're wondering about, like, yo, Buildzoid, your timings suck, well, they don't. Because we're at such a high clock speed that they're actually damn good. If you have a good memory kit, you might be able to, and a good CPU, you might be able to work them down lower. So yeah, definitely something you want to work down lower is going to be your TRFC right here. This generally is set way too high. So you can probably work that down into, like, the low to, like, for benchmarking, at, like, 4000 megahertz, it's pretty normal to run it around 240. But for long-term, for daily usage, you might actually still be able to run 240. I've never actually tested that, but, like, I would aim for around 400 TRFC, at least on Samsung BDI. I'm not sure how well it works on other memory ICs. So yeah, but for this setup right here, I could probably push that down to 500 or 400 megahertz, 400 ticks, and it would still be completely stable. And that's a huge performance gain right there, because that's the refresh cycle timing. So it's basically like this increases how much useful time we have on the memory. Because essentially this is 794 clock cycles during which we can't do anything with a good chunk of the RAM. We can't access any data and we can't write any data, so because it's busy refreshing. Then we have write recovery time, which, like, honestly, I don't know what most of the timings actually do. I just know what to set them to. Because, like, well, I have looked them up at some point in time to, like, get some rough idea of how they, like, what they do, but ultimately, as far as setting them goes, just work them down, because you don't really need to know what they do, just where they scale. So you can lower that. Don't touch these. All of the RTL timings, they're all the way at, like, the bottom of the gigabyte memory settings. Don't touch them. Just let the board do them for you, because if you try to mess with them, you'll probably screw something up. They're basically magic. And these set your, like, round trip latencies and IO latencies, and you really do want to just leave the motherboard to do them on its own, because it probably knows how to set them up better than you do. Though there are some exceptions where you might have to, like, lock them in manually, but most of the time you just want to let the board do its thing, because it knows how to set them up. So the RAS to RAS delays over here, I mean, if you're at lower frequencies, you can work them all the way down to, like, 4.4. And that's really fast. In fact, I've had them all the way down to, like, 3.3 with a TFAW of 12. So there's actually a relationship between TFAW, which is the 4-activate window, and the RAS to RAS delays. So essentially, this should be a multiple, like, of 4 of, like, TRRDL and TRRDS. So, because these are basically your this is your activate timing, pretty much. And this is how, like, the amount of time that 4 activates in a row can take to do. So if you have a really high TRRD, there's no point lowering the TFAW, because it's not going to do anything, because this is going to be, like, the activate timing itself is going to be longer. There's nothing actually stopping you from, like, setting this ridiculously low. Like, you can set it all the way to, like, 2 or something. It just doesn't improve your performance at that point. So, yeah. Basically, with the TFAW, you know, if you have, like, 4.4, you want to set it to, like, 16. If you have, like, 4.5, you can set it to, like, 18, 20. But if you set it to 20, then it's just going to be 5 anyway. Like, these are going to be taking pretty much 5 anyway. So, yeah. you can't, like, in my testing, you can't really go below, like, 3312. Actually, no, I've tested 228, so TRRD2, TRRDS2, TFAW8, but at that point, your performance degrades. And I think it's because it actually glitches out. Like, it literally, the memory chips aren't able to accept those kinds of timings at all. They just ignore that, and they default to a higher setting. So, yeah, with a lot of these timings, it's just like work them down as low as they go without losing stability. The only exception to that rule really is TREFI here, which is the interval between memory refreshes. The higher it is, the better, because it basically puts a gap. Like, this is the gap between your refresh cycles. So you want to refresh for as little time as possible, and you want to refresh as infrequently as possible. The problem is, if you have a really, really high TREFI and really low TRFC, you're going to get data corruption in the sense that, well, your memory cells are going to not be refreshed. And so the thing is, DRAM uses capacitors to store data. And the thing is, they will discharge just by sitting there. So if you have a 1 stored somewhere on the memory and you don't refresh that 1 for a really long period of time, it's going to be a 0 by the time you try to read it. And when that happens, you're going to get, like, well, it's supposed to be a 1. Instead, it's a 0. You're going to get an error. The whole system crashes. So that's kind of that. Basically, with a lot, like, the thing with the memory timings is just, like, you could read up on what every single one of them does. It ultimately doesn't help you that much with setting them, because it's basically it's guess and test as far as I'm concerned. I've not seen anything indicating a good method of manually tuning them. Well, not like a good rule set for tuning any of these. Because, yeah, basically just lower it by 1. Like, well, I wouldn't necessarily say lower it by 1. But, like, because the thing is, you're going to spend so much time memory testing, but what I like to do is just lower it until it stops posting and then go back up a bit, right, until it starts passing stress tests. Because if you keep lowering it by 1 and then like, if you start at stable settings, lower by 1, stress test, lower by 1, stress test, right, you're going to be, like, for some of these settings, you're going to be here forever, right? Like, if you're going to be going from 48 to, like, 20 for TFAW, you don't want to be doing that. You really don't want to be doing that. So, yeah. Anyway, let's run a Geekbench and see how our score improved. If this actually passes, I'm going to be relatively impressed, because Geekbench is actually relatively memory intensive. And I've never actually checked that this works. Well, I've never actually checked that this works without MaxMem. So, there. And it works great, and we're getting 8,375 points. Now if we just, like, crank up the TREFI a bit and lower the refresh cycle, we can pick up a bunch of extra points. Also, working the TRRDs down will help. Generally, like, this is not actually what the letters mean, but S and L, you can basically think of them short and long. Okay, that's not the literal meaning of them, but as a timing rule, it generally works, where you can, like, TRRDS can generally be a lot lower than TRRDL. But that's not why they're called well, I'm not sure that the L stands for long and short. I don't think it is. Because it's, as far as I know, it's related to something to do with the arrangement of the memory, the architecture of the memory itself. So, like, there's a distinction between which row to row delay, like, RAS to RAS delay it is, depending on, like, there's a physical meaning behind the timing. It's not just long and short, but if you're setting the time, if you're just lowering the timings, generally you can just think of them as long and short. As in short goes lower than long does. And the same works for TWTR and TWTRS as well. Those two do that as well. And TCWL, you generally, like a good rule of thumb when you're first setting up your settings is to either have it equal to cast latency or one lower than cast latency. But once you're tuning it, you can just lower it as far as it, like, you can just push it as low as it goes. So anyway, let's try squeeze out some more performance out of this. We got 8,375. Bam. And shut down and restart. There we go. Memory settings. Channel A subtimings. So we're just gonna go with TRFC of 450. The thing is, I'm not sure about how far you can push this at such a high frequency. I'm used to working with memory at like 4,200 megahertz at most. So I'm not sure on like where the timings bottom out for 4,500 yet. So yeah, we're just gonna start off with 4,500 for that one. We're going to leave command rate at 2T just because once you're in dual rank, 1T is really, really hard to run in general. Once you're in dual rank at high frequency, you can just forget about 1T completely. Basically, even if you're in like single rank, as far as I know, once you go past like 4,400 megahertz, you can forget about 1T working. Even on like good motherboards, you can just forget about it. So, yeah, and for TREFI, let's just start at 40,000. That should work. That's what I've been messing with previously. And ultimately, like, the goal for TREFI is to hit 65,534 without it crashing. If you can do that and pass stress tests, great. Because that's like the maximum amount of performance you can get out of that timing, because it literally doesn't go any higher. Like, that is the absolute limit for that one. So, 40,000. And, this one's actually set just fine, like that 12 is fine. We could probably work it down, but I don't see a reason to. And you can also see that, like, when we were in the ASRock timing configurator, right? TWTRS and TWTRL were much, much higher than what we can see in this column right here, which is why I said you want the configurator, because the BIOS just reads basically garbage as far as I can tell. So, we're just going to go for 10, 15 on those. And that's just something I've been messing with previously, and 10, 12 for our TRRDs, and that should work. And we can then set the TFAW to like 44. And we don't really want to mess with any of these. Oh, and then down here we have a bunch of like turnaround timings, so essentially delays between it's like groups, banks, DIMMs. I don't mess with these timings. I just let the motherboard deal with these. They are actually, as far as I know, they can have a pretty significant impact on performance. They're just like, there's too many damn timings as far as I'm concerned. Okay? So I've not really, and I don't spend that much time on like mainstream Intel, so I've not messed with like setting these manually myself. But you would just use the same procedure of just, you know, try lowering them and see if it keeps posting until it stops posting. And yeah, you're going to want to save a lot of profiles in the process, because obviously memory training is going to get steadily harder and harder. So at this point we should have a... Like, I expect to see, like, close to 9,000 points Geekbench memory score at this point. Which is actually, like, that's pretty damn good for Geekbench. I'm not sure how stable these settings are. They probably aren't. But should be pretty damn fast at this point. It's not that far from, like, the fastest settings. Well... not that far from like some of the best settings I ran. And at this point I'm just going to check the configurator, and everything is yeah, as expected. So we have 450. We could probably work that down into like low 300s. TCWL, we could probably push it down by like 2 or 3. Well, actually, if we can push TCWL down a good chunk, then cast latency might come down a bit as well. We can probably lower TRAS as well. Yeah, well, we can try lower everything, really. Like, there's no reason to just stop at some set of values. Just keep lowering things until it stops working. That's basically basically how you set memory, set up memory. So anyway, let's run the benchmark and see what it spits out, or if it crashes. If it crashes, then we know for a fact that this isn't even remotely stable, but Geekbench is a lot more, you know, tolerant than, say, proper memory stress testing applications. Like, say, memtest or... which, do I have memtest on here? Ah, we can grab memtest. Okay, so at this point, I'm pretty sure that this will actually pass. Because it passed Dijkstra. The Dijkstra test is like the hardest part of the entire thing. And then DFFT, which is coming right up. If we pass DFFT, we're good. So... Oh, so we didn't get anywhere as much of a jump as I was hoping for. So only 8,500, but you can still see how, like, you know, the test is pretty sensitive, so you can keep working the timings down and your performance will just keep going up. And I'm not going to tell you that there's like a good goal to aim for, because ultimately I think with memory overclocking, like, you hit pretty heavy diminishing returns pretty quickly, especially if you're just gaming. Like, for benchmarking, knock yourself out, right? Like, every bit of performance helps, especially if you're doing something like SuperPi or Geekbench, right? Or something like that. But if you're playing games, then quite frankly, if you get like the 7,000 points in Geekbench, you're doing pretty damn good. Because most memory kits, like stock, like if you run like 2133, Geekbench gives you like 5,000 points or something like that. So it's awful. 2133 is awful. So if you're getting like you know, 7,000 or 8,000 plus, you're doing pretty damn good. So yeah, anyway, let's grab memtest and see what that does. Because I actually do wonder how unstable this is. Oh, it's not plugged in right now. Go. Utility, memtest. Oh boy, I don't have the, well, whatever. I have a nice batch file for like launching a whole bunch of instances at the same time. Except I've evidently still not decided to save it to the damn thing. So obviously, if we were actually serious about memory stress testing here, we would like load up, well, we're on 32 gigs of RAM, so I would test like 28 gigs of the, so you'd load up like, how many instances? Like 14 instances of this, each of them testing 2 gigs. And that would give you a pretty, like, if it covers, like, personally, I stop at 100%, but if you actually want to be certain that it's stable, you want to go to like 400 or 500%. The issue is, obviously, if you have, the more RAM you have, the longer this takes to run. So if you're on like 64 gigs of RAM, running your stress test is going to take for freaking ever. The good news is, you can actually, like, you know, if you don't stress test all 32 gigs at the same time, you can still use like Firefox or something at the same time. But you're probably not going to be able to like use the computer for anything much more intensive than like a browser. So yeah, while this is running, so that kind of sucks. And damn, this is actually relatively stable. I was expecting this to just spew out errors like no tomorrow, and so far it's not doing that. Admittedly, we've tested like what? Less than 1/10 of the memory in the system, but still, like, I'm surprised. I was expecting a lot worse. Well, anyways, stop testing, we restart. restart anyway. That's really kind of that to the kind of if for memory testing. I mean, memory overclocking. I mean, like, partially it's because I kind of suck at it as far as I'm concerned. Because there are obviously people who actually know exactly what every single one of the timings does. But they work at the board vendors, you know? So they have better things to do than make overclocking guides. Let's see if okay, you know what? Let's not do that. I'm actually wondering if it's possible to run something. Like, I've almost done this. So I wonder if it's possible. I mean, I've posted it. I've posted it before. I've not finished Geekbench at it. So I'm just wondering if it's even possible. And we're going to do a quick test here, and we're just going to go to 15, 15, 15. We're just going to send everything to hell, right? Because we're going for stability here. So you can just throw your performance out the window and hope for the best. There, 20,000. That should be good enough. And I'm just going to help the memory controller because I'm actually kind of concerned for the poor thing. There. We shall see. I expect this to boot loop a couple times. Yeah, okay. It should boot loop a few times. Like, I did get 4666 to post once. Or twice. Actually, a couple of times. But the first time it was training, it took a while. So, we shall see if the board can figure out what to do. Because I sure as hell can't. I might have screwed something up for the board as well. Come on. Okay, well, looks like 4666 is not going to work. I'm not gonna say I'm surprised that it doesn't work, because I was surprised when it posted like a couple of times, and it really did take forever. And the thing is, we could actually leave the board like boot looping for a while, and it might eventually figure it out. The last time I got 4666 to post, I was basically not paying attention to the motherboard. I was just like I think I was eating dinner while memory overclocking, so I really wasn't in a rush to see this post. So yeah, I kind of just sat there like, is it or is it not? But obviously, if you want to get something done quickly, then this is not very productive. I'm just gonna see if we can get maybe to there. Where's the PSU? There. Like, it can sometimes help to discharge the motherboard and see if it might not try a slight, like, it can sometimes end up training a bit differently, which is why, like, ROG boards have a retry button. It essentially does what I did with the PSU for you. I got the feeling this ain't gonna work. Yeah, okay, I give up. We don't have all day, and this video is long enough already. There. So, I really hope that so far this has been somewhat helpful. Because unfortunately, a lot of memory overclocking, at least to me, it's like you either have a motherboard that works or you have a motherboard that doesn't. Because ultimately, like, most of what I've done is just leave stuff on auto, and it works just fine. And then after that, you know, if the board gets to a certain point, from there you can start tightening down the timings and trying things like that. But as far as, like, you know, special tricks to get way more frequency out of it or something like that, I'm not really aware of any. So let's load that one up. Yeah, so this isn't set up correctly right now. Well, actually, I wonder if it's gonna... I just want to make sure that everything I've been doing so far actually does something. So we're gonna try post that, right? Just right off the bat and see if it trains. And then I'll see if we really do need to manually set the terminations. Which I think we should have to. You gotta be kidding me. But it isn't stable. That's interesting. So I really do wonder what it's configuring when it ends up like this. So I guess we'll see it right now, what it ended up settling on for the timings. Because evidently it doesn't work, unlike when, you know, I manually forced it to what I used. Because, yeah, this is really unstable, isn't it? Reset button doesn't work. That's why, that's the other reason why ROG boards have a retry button. Because sometimes the CPU crashes so hard that the reset button doesn't work. There we go. I think the BIOS actually wiped. Like, it recovered itself. Oh, no, it didn't. It actually trained. Okay, let's see what it configured and why it's not working. No, those are correct. Those are also correct. Interesting. So why isn't it stable? Is it not stable? I get the feeling that it tries to retrain them every time if you don't lock them in, which is why it, like, is acting so, like, it's not posting again, right? So that's the thing, is, like, when the board fails to post, you don't know why it doesn't fail to, like, what it did that's wrong. Because you can't see what it tried to configure. Yeah, see, it's not posting again. So I just wiped the BIOS, and we're gonna try a... We're going to try 4533 just right off the bat, you know. Set everything manually and see if it works. Which it should. So at least, you know, it'll save you time if you're trying to get... Well, more like it'll make the board behave consistently. Because if you leave the board to do its own thing with the terminations, it evidently doesn't know what to do with them. Okay. Make it in the BIOS. I don't want to see a Windows. Good. Okay, set F2. We're going to load up our profile, right? And I'm going to manually fix up the extra settings in there. We're going to go with guide 1. Okay, bam. And advanced memory settings. And we're just going to go straight for 4533. We're going to see if we can make that post right off the bat and, like, work. Go to the bottom. Actually, no, we need to go advanced, bottom. 40, 40, 40, 120, 20. There. So that's the correct set of terminations for that side. And we're going to do this side as well. There we go. And at this point, if we press F10, it should work. So at least I'll feel like I achieved something. Come on. Please don't make me look stupid. See? Well, that's not supposed to happen. Okay, there. Now if we make it to Windows without crashing, that would be what I am hoping for. Okay, I think, oh, right, we're back on 1.2 volts VCCIO, aren't we? And I'm like, oh yeah, we're totally going to get into Windows at 4533 megahertz, aren't we? No surprises there. That poor memory controller. Too much data, not enough voltage. Hopefully it's stable enough for us to do stuff in the BIOS. Okay, it is. Yeah, okay, it's definitely that. There. That's what was missing. Oh, it locked up on exit. Oh, man. I wonder if it applied them. Okay, it really locked up. Okay. Don't you love memory overclocking? I love memory overclocking. The best part is when you try to copy everything I've done and it doesn't work for you. Which I would not be even remotely surprised by. Because, like, what I do barely works for me at the best of times. Anyway, let's see. Okay, it did apply. Cool. So now we should be stable enough to make it into Windows and run a Geekbench and be like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And right? Oh, right. It's preparing automatic... What? That's weird. The hell? You kidding me? I guess it must... Well, then it has to be the dim voltage, then. There's a reason why I don't do many memory overclocking guides. It might be because I suck at them. Just gonna give the system agent a bit more. I don't actually remember how much VCCSA we ran last time. Actually, it was a lot, so... Let's bump those up a bit. And... I just want to check that there's nothing... Oh! Wait. Oh! Yeah, that would do it. Because then it would probably try to set the TCWL. Yeah, that would do it. There. I really wish I had some more, like, useful information to show you, but, like, basically I'm showing you that it's pretty trial and error. Which is accurate. But, yeah. Yeah, and at this point it should work as expected. Honestly, for long-term use, I wouldn't try to... Well, for the sake of my own sanity as a user, if this was in my daily system, I would not go above, like, 4400 megahertz. Just because, as you can clearly see, 4533 brings up a few issues that 4400 doesn't quite have. So, yeah. Bam, and we've got 8,000, 8,350 points on memory performance again. So, yeah, it's working as expected at this point. And we can just open up timing configurator and we can clearly see like this is terrible, this is terrible. I would aim to get like both of these, I would aim for single digits. I'd aim for single digits on this one and this one probably around 11 or 12. Something like that. This one I'd leave alone. That looks fine. T-Faw is awful. Just like, which is no surprise. Like these are maxed out, right? 15 plus 15, like 4 times 15 is 60. So, that's why that's going to like 63 there. Yeah. And, oh yeah, the thing about the RTLs is that they'll actually change based on your frequency and your, there's like a set of timings that affects RTLs. I think it's TCWL, TCL, maybe RCD and TR, no, I think these don't affect it. These two don't care. TRAS might. And so there's like a combination of timings which affects what RTLs work and don't work, which is why I basically consider them magic, because the motherboard on its own can most of the time figure it out just fine. So yeah, that's it. That's it for memory overclocking. Hopefully you found this at least somewhat useful, because quite frankly I think this was terrible. Partly because I'm not very good at memory overclocking, and nobody seems to believe me when I say that. And partly because, well, mostly because of that. So, I wish there was somebody more competent that would do a memory overclocking video, but most of the people who are actually good at this don't really want to share. So, yeah, that kind of sucks. Yeah. Hopefully this helps you if you're overclocking on the Z390 Master. If you're on memory chips that aren't like Samsung B-Die, or you're on less memory sticks, you're probably just going to end up at worse frequencies. Also, if you actually have different memory chips, you're probably going to need completely different DIMM terminations, which is why, again, I recommend you just let the board do those for you. See you up to where they work, and then lock them in, and then just keep them there. From like whatever frequency they top out at. So, yeah, that's it. I guess thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Wait, who is anybody even here at this point? It's an hour and 16 minutes. Yeah, like, share, subscribe. Leave any comments, questions, suggestions, complaints down in the comment section below. I'll read them. Probably won't care. Ultimately, I wasn't really a fan of the idea of making this video myself. What else is there? Right, comments that. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's also t-shirts and other stuff you can buy on Teespring. There's links to both the Patreon and Teespring down in the description below. They both help out immensely with running the channel, so, you know, it'd be great if you checked those out. And with that, that's everything for the video, so I need to go find the mouse and the stop button. Is that... No, that's not the right mouse. Where is the mouse? Oh, there's the mouse. And there's the stop button. Goodbye!